So we're just going to start. Last week we discussed individual and most important thing first. Thank you so much to Susie for helping to set up the breakfast this morning. We're coming early and doing that.
Thanks, Susie.
Thank you, Susie.
What about the bagels today?
Leftovers.
What?
Leftovers from Aggie.
And the heart things for still providing us with the bagels.
I'll volunteer for next week. Is we volunteering? Is that
Go
how it
for
works?
it, yeah.
I'll
like
like breakfast.
Thank you, Chanah.
Watch out, it might be
Pizza.
tofu.
Did you make French
Tofu.
So just watch out.
You said you could make French toast.
Oatmeal, you make really good oatmeal.
Good idea, Chanah. That sounds good.
Yeah, you make really good oatmeal.
As promised last week, this week we now have the prayer of Chanah.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry that you're stuck with me. You're only getting one line really because there's a lot to learn about even from the one line. So just to recap a little bit from last week, we discussed individual and communal prayer, and in particular discussed the reciting of the Amidah as individuals silently, and then also as a community together. There's one thing that in the repetition. There's one thing that I neglected to say last week, and that is that the best example of the importance of the repetition, as it were, the communal recitation of the Amidah, is on Rosh Hashanah itself, which is up and coming. If you look in the Machzor on Rosh Hashanah, first of all, you'll notice that the texts are not identical, like they normally are during the week. So one begins to think after noticing this that maybe it's not just a repetition, there's actually new material in the second one, in what we call the repetition. But also there's the shofar blowing. And I also mentioned last week that the Rav felt very strongly that the shofar itself was its own kind of tefillah. So it's not an interruption in saying the Amidah, either in the silent one or in the communal one, because it is also tefillah. It makes sense to have tefillah put together with other tefillah. But this all, I think, tells us that the recitation of the communal Amidah, especially on Musaf, on Rosh Hashanah in Musaf, is its own standalone prayer, right? With its own value. It's not just like if you daven on your own and then you miss the repetition, so you've covered yourself. Not at all. In fact, one might argue that the more important one to be there for Rosh Hashanah, especially because the mitzvah of shofar is fulfilled at that time, is for the second recitation of Musaf, communally. So that just underscores, I think, the broader point that both of these things have their own independent value. They're not just copies of each other. Okay. But we did mention that there is such thing as a private recitation, what was called in the last source we learned last week, tefillah b'lachash, tefillah in a whisper. So we'll start off on the first page with a whispered prayer. Now the story of Chanah is one of the, I think, most important stories that we have from Tanakh, especially because of the impact it has on our tefillah year-round. And Chanah emerges as one of the great heroes of Tanakh as a result. And this is how it goes. There was a fellow named Elkanah from Har Ephraim, so I take it very personally, this story, the mountain of Ephraim. And he had two wives, something we learned about this past week, actually, in Kiseitse, that one of the, I heard of Meidan. Sorry?
They're making wife commentary. Really?
You're on camera. Be
Yeah.
careful. We learned, or I heard of Meidan from Gush speak about this actually, that you get a sense from Tanakh that it never really goes very well. That even though it might be something that's permissible, it's not recommended at all. And this story is no exception. It goes very badly. He had two wives. One of them and it lays it out for us, the conflict right away. That Nina had children, and Chanah ein yeladim. Chanah did not have any children. So every single year, Elkanah would make pilgrimage to Yerushalayim, and there he would bring korbanos, and they would have celebrations and parties, and they would eat aplenty. And he would give portions of these sacrifices to Penina and to all of her children, and to Chanah he gave a particular portion, mana achas apayim. What that means is debated among the Rishonim. Some people believe that she got a double portion. Some people believe she got a higher quality portion. Some people believe actually that it reflected his frustration. It was a portion that somehow reflected his frustration that she had no children. But I prefer the first two interpretations because he es Chanah ahev, for he loved Chanah the most, so he gave her a special portion. It sounds like either double or higher quality, or more quantity or more quality. But Penina was not so kind. Penina would go out of her way to upset Chanah, to perhaps rub it in her face, to make her jealous, in order to undermine her overall demeanor, and perhaps also to undermine the love that Elkanah had for her. And this had an impact on her. She became depressed and she would not eat the food. So Elkanah confronted her and said, aren't I as good to you as 10 children? Meaning, I don't care. I don't care that you have no children. I love you as much as an entire family possibly could. So why be so sad? So Elkanah does not respond to that, and we'll kind of analyze that later. She does not respond to that, and instead she gets up and goes to the Mishkan herself. At this time there was no Beis HaMikdash. They were going to the Mishkan, which was in Shiloh, and under the ward of Eli, the Kohen Gadol. So she goes, and Vihi Maras Nafesh, she was very bitter. Vatispalel al Hashem uvachos yivkeh, and she prayed to God and cried abundantly. Vatidor neder, and she made a promise. Vatomar Hashem tzakos imraos tireh ba'ani amasecha, if you will recognize the dereliction of your maidservant, uzchartani v'los yishkach es amasecha, and you remember me and don't forget me, v'nasatala amascha zera nashim, and you give to your maidservant the seed of man, unesativ la'Hashem kol yimei chayav, I will give the fruit of it, I will give my child to God all of his days. U'moralo ya'alel rosho, and he will never cut his hair. He'll be a Nazir, a Nazirite, and he'll somehow be devoted to God's service all his life. That's her promise. Give me one child, I'll give him away to you. V'haya ki hir bisa lispalel, and in her multiplication of prayer, Lifnei Hashem, before God, ve'eli shomer es piha, and Eli was watching her mouth. And this is where our first source picks up, in the 13th pasuk of Shmuel Aleph of 1 Samuel. V'chana hi medaberes al liba. So what did Eli see when he watched her mouth? He saw that she was speaking to her heart, or in her heart. Rak spaseha naos, only her lips moved, v'kola lo yishamea, but her voice could not be heard. Vayachshevaha Eli l'shikora, and Eli thought that she was drunk. And he confronts her, and she explains, no, I'm not drunk, I'm just, I'm very disturbed, and I'm praying. And she explains to him the whole situation, and he sends her off in peace. The book is called Shmuel, because ultimately she had a baby, and the baby was named Shmuel, and became one of the great prophets of our entire history. So, it's actually interesting to me. When I was in 7th or 8th grade, whenever I learned this, I remember actually my Rebbe saying, why did he think she was drunk? Because, she was speaking and could not be heard, right? She was just moving her lips, and it was, gibberish to him. He couldn't hear what she was saying, and she looked like some crazy person just kind of wandering the streets without any, purpose, talking to herself. She looked crazy. So he assumed she was drunk, which I always thought meant, well, then the standard of prayer must have been, it had to be out loud, right? If people frequently pray to themselves quietly, then he wouldn't have thought this was an aberration of any kind. Clearly, he thought she was doing something aberrant, that she wasn't fitting with the norm or standard. It's possible that it's not that way, because in the end, halachically, Chazal felt that actually she is the gold standard, and we'll see in a minute how we derive our halachos, very important ones, from Chanah's silence. So it's strange. It would, I always had this kind of dissonance in my mind. How is it that Eli felt the standard should be you should do it out loud, otherwise you might look like you're drunk, crazy somehow, and Chazal felt that no, actually quietness is, a whispered prayer has great value. It could be differently. The previous pasuk says says a couple of things. It wasn't just that our pasuk that I quoted for you because it's important halachically. It says that she was speaking without being heard. But the previous pasuk in Eli's observation, v'hayaki hir b'sali hispalel, that she kept going on with her prayer. She had abundant prayer with Hashem. Ve'eli shomeres piha. So then Eli began watching her mouth. Perhaps she was just going on so long that Eli felt, any normal concern would have been addressed already at this point. Why is she still here after 3 hours of whispering to herself? Maybe it's more than just prayer. Maybe it's drunkenness as well. So anyhow, it may not be. It may be a huge departure from the way Chazal viewed things. It may not be a departure at all. But let's look at the second source, which kind of goes off from Chanah's whispered prayer. Second source is from Brachos, which contains many of the halachos and thoughts of Chazal about tefillah. Amar Rav Hamnuna, Kama hilchasa gavravusa ika lemishma mehani krai d'Chana. There are many important halachos that we can learn from the psukim of Chanah. And he quotes, V'Chana hi medaberes aliba. Chanah was speaking in her heart. Mikan, from here we learn lemispalel tzarich shechaven libo. Whoever davens has to direct his heart. We say kavana. What does kavana mean?
Intent.
So a lot of times we think it means intent, and it does. It means intent. But the word literally means kivun is a direction. Okay, we have direction is actually very important in Judaism and many religions, especially when it comes to prayer. I have a very close friend doing his dissertation on this, on direction in prayer, comparing Judaism to Islam. So we know to face a certain direction, right, physically, and we'll learn about that later, but also there has to be a heart direction. Shechavein libo, we have to direct our hearts. How does one do this? So yeah, you have to have intent. We have to have, for me intent doesn't really capture everything kavana is supposed to be, right? Intent is two kids are fighting in the playground. Did you mean to hit him or didn't you? No, it was an accident. Did I mean to pray? Yeah, I meant to, but doesn't quite capture, I think, everything that kavana is supposed to have. Kavana means every word of ours has purpose, right? That somehow in our hearts there is purpose to what we're doing when we're praying. Not just that I'm thinking about the Yankee game from last week while I'm praying this morning. It's not. Even though I meant to pray, I got up, I set my alarm, I got dressed. It's Sunday morning, I didn't really want to, and then I got here, and I had to find a new seat, and okay, so I did it. Clearly, there's intent, but that's not good enough. There has to be some kind of purpose in your heart. So that's what he learns out from Midaberes Aliba, speaking to her heart. He learns out we have to have some kind of intent. Then he goes on. Rak sfaseh naos, only her lips were moving. Mikan lemispalel shayach toch bisfasa. It's also very important. From here we learn out that a person actually has to articulate with their lips. A lot of people I've seen, and this is important, because prayer is meditative. And meditation should be a component of prayer, partly because of how much we have to direct our intent and to focus our minds and hearts. But to simply meditate is not sufficient. Prayer has to be verbally articulated. That's not to say that if a person mentally meditates on an idea and thinks about a prayer, that God doesn't perceive it or that it has no value. The Nefesh HaChaim is Nefesh HaChaim is a very seminal work that kind of shaped really what Judaism looks like today in many ways in terms of the yeshiva world. Written by Rav Chaim of Volozhin about 200 years ago, a little bit less than 200 years ago. And in it he writes about the three different ways that we can have a positive impact on the spiritual realm, through our actions, through our speech, and through our thoughts. Certainly our thoughts are still recognized by God, and even thoughts can even be mitzvah thoughts or sinful thoughts, right? They can contribute positively to the spiritual realm, and our thoughts can serve God, and even thoughts can even cause the transgression of sins, and also detract from the spiritual realm. So, for instance, like thoughts of hatred. Thoughts of hatred, it's better than having words of hatred, better than having actions of hatred. The thoughts of hatred are still bad and still sinful in many ways. Rabbi Zach is discussing every single morning when he's not on vacation, he discusses the laws of lo tisnas achicha b'vavecha. You're not allowed to hate, it's a mitzvah in the Torah, you're not allowed to hate your brother in your heart. Just inside, internally, you can violate a mitzvah midoraisa, a biblical negative commandment, just as well as you can violate one by eating pork, right? They're all negative commandments either way. Anyhow, so that's important too. I had a friend who, and I think there's value in this. I had a friend who he once was trying to reconnect with prayer. I think he was trying to explore ways in which he could enhance his tefillah, and he tried to do an entire tefillah non-verbally. He literally would look through the siddur like this, following every word with his fingers, not saying anything, but just really trying to think about it in his own mind. He would temesh in Shemona Esrei, he would shuckle, he would bow, but his lips would never open the entire time. And I think there certainly, in the search for meaning in prayer, I think that was very commendable of him. But it does not fulfill halach the mitzvah of tefillah, according to this, because we see from Chanah that her lips were articulating something. And so too our lips have to articulate something. That's a good practice to do perhaps after or beforehand, to go through the entire siddur and really think and focus about every word, I think has great value. But to daven, we have to actually say something. V'kola lo yishamea, the last line of this Gemara, and her voice was not heard. Mikan she'asur lehagbia kolo b'tfilaso. From here we learn you cannot raise your voice in prayer. That prayer has to be somehow muted or quiet. And what exactly is this talking about? So look at the next Gemara. Hamashmiya kolo b'tfilaso. Now remember, this tefillah, when the Gemara discusses tefillah proper, we usually assume it means Shemona Esrei, the Amidah. So, Hamashmiya kolo b'tfilaso. If a person makes his voice heard while saying the Shemona Esrei, hareza mikat ne'amuna. This person is of the small of faith. He has very little faith. Why? What do you think?
Thinks Hashem doesn't hear him?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe it's because he's trying. When Eliyahu was battling with the 400 prophets of Baal on Har Carmel, and he made a deal with them, and he said, "Well, both let's see who's right. My God or your God." So he set up. He's like, let's make two different altars. You set up your altar, I'll set up mine. And the only thing is, neither of us will bring fire to our own altars. We'll leave that to God. So you'll set up the whole sacrifice, you'll put a cow on it, you'll put the wood, and you'll pray to your God, to Baal. And if he answers you by sending fire, so he is the true God. And afterwards, I'll set up my altar, and if my God sends fire, then he's the true God. So the prophets of Baal, they set up their thing, they began to daven, they were praying, they were hoping, they were doing all kinds of rituals, and at some point Eliyahu began to, because it wasn't working, so at some point Eliyahu began to mock them. He said, "Why don't you call a little bit louder? Maybe he's sleeping. Maybe he's in the bathroom. Maybe I can't hear you right now." So that, he was making fun of them. But he said, "Call louder, because he can't hear you." So this is also I think I mentioned this before, one of my friends I have lots of friends who have interesting theological beliefs. One of my friends who is an agnostic, he's not sure what he thinks about God's existence, so he once challenged me. He said, "Effie, how can it be if we have a God who's infinite, right? Who's literally, we call hamakom, the place, the omnipresent. He's everywhere, because he surpasses space. He overwhelms space. If that's so, then approaching Rosh Hashanah, how can he really care about or even notice the small minutiae of all of our lives? He's too big. It's like us trying to follow the world of ants. It wouldn't work. You can't possibly follow the world of ants. They all look the same, they all look mundane, they all look, pretty stupid, and you wouldn't think that has any value. So how can God, looking at us, see any value? or even notice us. And I said to him, I think it's quite the opposite. I think the greater a person is, the greater is his capacity to notice the value, even in small things. So, it's not that God is so big so we have to yell really loudly, but God is so big so that he can even hear a very quietly whispered prayer. That's how I see it. Amar Avuna. So the second line says that in the name of Avuna, Lo shanu ela sheyachol lechavein es libo belachash. That was only said, right, when we talked about a person in the first line, a person who raises his voice, being of the small of faith. Avuna says that's only if you're able to direct your heart when you whisper. But if you are unable to direct your heart when you whisper, it's mutter, then you're allowed to raise your voice. Meaning perhaps it will detract from your own kavanah if you have to whisper. Some people actually gain a lot of focus by saying it out loud. They can hear themselves, they articulate the words. Sometimes it actually helps to say it a little bit more loudly. Maybe you can emotionally get yourself more into it by giving voice to the prayer. So then it would be mutter to make your voice heard. V'hani mili, but that also has a qualification. V'hani mili, those words are said only biyachid, when you're on your own. It's like, if you're traveling, near a minyan, or if you're just stopping at home because you missed minyan or you can't make it. So then if you're on your own and you're unable to focus unless you say it out loud, then you can say it out loud. Aval b'tzibur, but if you are with other people in a congregation, atil mitra tzibura, you might disturb other people. You might disturb the congregation by being too loud. So then it's not permissible. A lot of this is true about, Tchaikovsky used to say that music is made in the gaps between the notes. Not in the notes. The gaps between the notes. And I think that actually it's something about music that sometimes people think that to contribute to the song, let's say people are singing together, they have to sing the loudest. The louder they are, the more they're contributing. But often what this leads to, and I think not in our shul, but maybe you've traveled other places and you've heard it and seen it, that they'll have sections of the shul not necessarily singing together, right? That it's like a round almost. It's like it starts off in one place, it's taken up somewhere else a few seconds later, and then then it becomes kind of personal. Then they want to wage war. I'm right. My timing is correct in this section, so like they have to. They try to enforce their timing on the rest of the shul, and then it becomes like a very.
I think we see that happen with the choir.
I once saw this somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting that we're discussing this because I find it very common, and I've been in many synagogues in different communities where there may be someone who is davening a little loud, or a portion of their Shemoneh Esrei is loud, and I get disturbed. And my concentration is gone.
So here's the thing, and this is what I'm trying to say about music, is that music involves a lot more listening than singing. If you can't hear each other when you sing with other people, it's never going to sound okay. That's why there's a conductor in the first place. Like, why can't they just, these are professional musicians. What, they can't figure it out? Time them, it's 4/4 times. So time yourself, tap your foot, and play the notes when you're supposed to play them. And the reason is because that's hard to do if you don't know where everyone else is holding. You have to follow each other. Music, and that's the music requires, and it's not people who sing really beautifully. Musicians, I think, know this. It's not because they have the best voices, it's because they have the best hearing for the music. They hear the music the best. It's a perfect pitch means. Perfect pitch means that you hear music perfectly, not that you can sing music perfectly. Ella Fitzgerald had perfect pitch singing it, but a lot of other people have the ability to hear it very well, which is what enabled them to sing a nice harmony, or to sing in time with other people. I used to play clarinet when I was in high school, and I remember that I performed a piece with someone on my first performance, a piece on Mozart, and and the person paired with me had to really bear with me because it was my first performance. So I was very lucky to have a pianist accompany me who was really good at listening to where I was, you know, how I was going. He was able to cover for my mistakes because of how well he was listening to what I was doing. And that's really what it required to sing together. We have to be able to hear each other, to listen very carefully.
So we don't need singing lessons, we need
Hearing lessons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Either that or clarinet lessons.
Yeah, that's true. It's worthwhile to learn an instrument for that reason, I think.
Rabbi, isn't there also something with the Hebrew letters and the black letters and the spaces and I know
Yeah.
that's a whole other thing, but isn't
That
it
is a
like
whole-
children hear in between the letters because they're able to,
Interesting.
I don't know, there's
That I
something
hadn't
about
heard.
men with the black letters and women with the, I don't know, I'll find
White
out about it,
space.
but it's an interesting thought how, about listening when you're speaking Hebrew or,
Well, here's actually, I'll address half of it that you said
Okay.
that I'm familiar with, is that there's an idea, a mystical idea that Torah, it's an idea. This is a statement that is supposed to have meaning, right? So it's not just an idea, it's kind of a placeholder for something. But the statement is that Torah is such that it is written black fire on white fire, right? It's not just black ink on white parchment. It's black fire on white fire. What that means, I've never heard the male-female difference. You know, I'm not sure that's connected anywhere in the Gemara or the Zohar. But the idea is that the margins in the text, the spaces between the letters, is also part of the writing of Torah. It's black fire is the letters, the white fire is the parchment, but that's also the part of the writing. It's just different kinds of fire. So it's that space in between, perhaps yes, the silence, and perhaps our ability to fill that silence with meaning, that is part of Torah itself. But bringing it back to tefillah is that if you're trying to make yourself heard over the crowd, that's not really being together with the crowd, which is what this is all about. If you, in your private Amidah, some people will try to help out the crowd. If on Rosh Chodesh, they'll try to race through Shemona Esrei to get to Ya'alev Yavo first, so that they can say very loudly, Ya'alev Yavo, and then in the middle of, they'll keep going, so that everyone knows they have to say Ya'alev Yavo and Rosh Chodesh, which is actually, that can be a service to people, but when like 10 different people do it in a row, so like, we got the message the first 3 times, I think, and if not, so you're not helping. But that's often the case. The truth is, even in the parts of tefillah that can be said out loud, like Psuki de Zimra, or oftentimes Shema, sometimes people can get carried away, and it's important to add your voice to the crowd. Certainly, like it's saying here, voice can add to kavanah, and can be helpful. I have a struggle with this personally myself. I'm a person who likes to daven out loud, but sometimes I catch myself kind of maybe being so much louder than the rest of the crowd that it's kind of too noticeable, or perhaps not really kind of being in sync with the crowd. I have to watch myself to make sure that even if my voice can be heard, it's not being heard in a disruptive way, but in a more contributive way. But during the Amidah, I think the stakes are so high that the advice here is it can't be heard at all. I actually used to daven. This was a big. When I was in Israel in yeshiva, there were only 12 of us. It was a very new yeshiva, first year, and we were a very tight group. But one of the guys, actually, sweetest guy on earth, really the biggest tzaddik in our entire group, I think, and really annoyed me all davening long, because he would say actually the entire Shemona Esrei really audibly, out loud, so that I could even, people could hear it. It was kind of annoying.
Okay, hold on. Someone's meeting with Rabbi Epstein. I should go do something, or...
How about,
Thank you.
I was sort of wondering
So,
if the...
just a thought is,
Yeah.
this actually became one of my big, it's important to learn, in yeshiva, it's important to work on yourself in terms of learning. It's also important to work on your own mitos and your own character traits. So I knew I was frustrated about this guy. I wanted all year long to confront him about the issue. And I told myself that this was actually going to be something that I tried to just get over, to help myself learn to get over things that aren't, it's like, you don't have to be so worked up over this guy's praying. So I tried to, that was what I tried to do. It still kind of annoyed me at the end of the year, but I was able to hold my tongue.
Still working for you.
It's still working.
We're here for you.
Thank you. Yes.
Wouldn't the fact that we don't say Amen to the final benediction before the beginning of the Midah,
Yeah.
that silence is sort of imposed right at that point?
Interesting. That's a separate issue. That's because the last bracha before Shemona Esrei starts is Michamocha, ends with Gal Yisrael. God redeemed the Jewish people. There's an idea that we'll learn together that the concept of redemption has to be connected directly to Shemona Esrei, to the Amidah. It sets our minds straight. There can be no separation between those two things. So by saying Amen, it's almost like, we're sticking extra words there. We're separating between the bracha and Shemona Esrei.
But you're reaffirming it by saying Amen, you say so.
Yeah, that's true. We'll discuss this in greater length. I hear you. I think that it's not so bad to say Amen. I think some people might even, I don't know, I haven't seen it, but I imagine there's got to be someone who says it's okay because rationally I think it does make sense. You're not really disturbing, you are affirming it. Nonetheless, a lot of people say not to, so they'll have either the Shliach Tzibur say it so quietly that you can't hear the bracha, so you can't say Amen, or they recommend that you say it along together with the Shliach Tzibur, in which case you won't be saying Amen because you just finished your own bracha yourself. Not that you're hearing his, you're just saying yours. So that's what I do. I try to say it together with the Shliach Tzibur, not to finish before he does, so that you don't come up to the opportunity. But I imagine it's actually not such a big deal. But people try to avoid it.
Is the thing with that they are small of faith, could that be tied that if they have the air to say it louder than anything, they aren't humble?
Interesting.
And then therefore they aren't humble, they don't show their faith.
That may be.
In a way.
Well, humility we know is tied to faith. That the Rambam writes that humility is one of the two, or perhaps one of the one character traits that has two facets to it, that a person can go to an extreme on. His golden rule is that in all character traits you have to be moderate. Don't be overly generous, because then you'll end up giving everything away. Don't be overly miserly, because that's not kind. Be somewhere in the middle. But about humility, the Rambam says, be extreme about humility. Be extremely overabundantly humble. And why? What's at stake? What's at stake is that a person promotes his own ego and his own presence and existence over and above the ego and presence of God. So perhaps you're right. Perhaps the person who tries to promote himself too much is someone who does not recognize he stands in the presence of the infinite Lord, the creator of the universe, and he should have a little bit more humility. So you're right, that may be. That's very beautiful. Anyhow, how does this work out halachically? So the Tur is one of the predecessors of the Shulchan Aruch, and this is written, this is, I think, taken la halacha. So look at the last verse on the first page. Had amar shelo yishama kolo b'tfilaso. This that is said that you can't make your voice heard in prayer. Shetzricha shetiyeh b'lachash ad shelo tishma afilu la'oznav. That is that you have to whisper it to the point that you don't even hear it in your own ears. Umevi'in raya min ha-tosefta, and we bring a proof from this from the Tosefta. Remember, the Tosefta is a parallel work to the Mishnah, finished around the year 200. It just wasn't incorporated in the Mishnah itself. There were other statements written by Chazal in those couple of centuries that were still maintained, and they're still important, but they weren't what the Gemara itself was built upon. They appear in the Gemara from time to time. Yachol, this is what it says, Yachol yehei mashmiel ha'oznav, quote, perhaps a person should make prayer audible to his own ears. No, kivar peirash bechana v'kola lo yishamea. That we already learned by Chanah that her voice could not be heard. So, remember, the question is, can a person make it heard to his own ears? The answer is no, because Chanah's voice could not be heard. So the Tosefta is interpreting that pasuk as meaning it could not be heard not just to Eli, could not even be heard to Chanah herself. Okay. Yeah, question?
Yeah, when when the Talmud says that Eli was not able to know what Hannah was praying, he went and checked with the Tudim and Urim.
Yeah.
That he did it wrongly, and that's the reason he came and asked, directed himself to her as a drunken woman. My question is, if before Hannah came, it was a custom that whoever will come and pray will pray loud, and then Anna came and changed completely the prayer of the
So-
model of prayer.
Question.
So first of all, consulting the Urim V'Tumim is not recorded in Tanakh. So if there's a medrash or something that happened
Talmud.
to the Gemara, so that could be. Or it could be they were trying to say something about it without making a historical point. So, I don't know. But that's kind of how we started off the conversation. What was the standard? If he's surprised by her being quiet, it almost sounds like silence or whispered prayer was not the standard, that really praying out loud was the standard. And I suggested that perhaps it wasn't the silence that was surprising to him, but more the length of the prayer. That she kept going and wasn't stopping and wasn't leaving, that she kind of kept lingering in the Mishkan, that perhaps was the issue. that perhaps was the issue. So, I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was the standard not to be quiet about it, but the Chazal felt that, by the time that they kind of came around, that actually this should be the standard, and they took her to be normative, which is actually a little even more impressive. That Chanah came, broke from standard, and in the end, her approach became normative for us.
I have a question.
Perhaps, yes.
So why, is there any reasoning why it would be a woman that is that gives us this example? I mean, not that we are looking for a reason, but I wonder.
Was it unusual for a woman to be there in the first place?
That does not actually sound to be like the aberration at all, right? He's not. I don't think it sounds like he's surprised that she's there. Certainly, we know that the Beis Hamikdash was built with a women's section. With
It was a second thought, though. It was a second thought, though, wasn't it? They built another section for ladies afterwards.
It could be, but even as far, it may not have been a necessary part of the service, but it may have been anyhow that because people so frequently came to pray, in any case, they had to build it for practical reasons. So it may not have been second thought because it wasn't standard in the first place, but because it wasn't a necessary part of the service.
We have the same
I don't know.
precedent with Sarah, with Rachel. Although at that time there was no Beis Hamikdash to go to.
Yeah, Rachel does go to. Well, I mean Rivka. Rivka goes to consult.
No, Rachel was barren at first.
I'm sorry.
Rachel was the one who was barren at first. And
They all
so she-
were there.
Well, they all had to go through it, but Rachel was the last of them.
Yeah, but she was the one who was. Leah was going 1, 2, 3, 4, and
Yeah.
she was getting nothing, So.
Well, Rachel ended up yelling at Yaakov, "Why aren't you doing anything about this?" And he got angry at her.
Yeah.
What do you want me to do about it? It's up, it's not my problem. It's your problem. So Rivka actually did go to him to go consult what God would have to say about this. What that means is not totally clear. The Medrash says that the Medrash does, because there's a confusing passage, but that perhaps Yitzchak and Rivka are both davening. I think it's pretty clear that clear from Chanah that women certainly did prayer in biblical times.
Why Eli has to know, that when the Talmud says that he didn't know what he was praying, so he went to check in the Tudim, I thought, why he has to know what he's praying?
Well, again, he was, I think, concerned for the sanctity of the Mishkan. He was afraid that perhaps she was drunk, so he ended up confronting her. I guess some people would argue that women have maybe a proclivity towards prayer. I'm not such a fan of that kind of thinking. We know from from a lot of things. The Avos, the Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were foundations of prayer as well. Men also, I think, have proclivity to pray. I'm not sure if it was specifically because she was a woman, but specifically because of the quality of her prayer, what she was accomplishing, and the circumstances of her prayer. That we kind of take her as a model. Yes, Jim?
I'll just read what Rabbi Soloveitchik says.
Oh, I was going to say that for our later time.
Okay.
About her being alone?
No, about why a woman.
Oh, so go for it. Oh, go for it. No, that answers the question.
Well, that's just what he said. Just what
Go
he
for it,
says
Stuart.
is the attribute of intimacy and the humble knowledge that we are totally dependent on God is most profound in women. In women, as expressed, and then he chooses the pasuk from Psalm 45, that the entire honor of the princess rests within. Men often find intimate conversation difficult. Is that true?
Yes.
Probably.
Yes.
I think you would. Difficult, and in some cases demeaning, because it threatens to strip a man of his veneer or of strength. It's therefore a woman who was chosen by providence to be the prototype of the silent Shemona Esrei. So now it's.
But you don't hold by that.
It's
Yeah,
One person's opinion.
right.
Yeah.
And it's not Rabbi
It's
Soloveitchik. It's Rabbi Gennady.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there was a time when I would even say like we do say things about masculine ways of doing things and feminine ways of doing things. I think there are a lot of feminine men and a lot of masculine women, and also masculine men and feminine women, and people who have qualities of both, feminine and masculine qualities. I'm not sure that has to. We say those things. I'm not sure if they really have anything to do with actual men or actual women, but it's some kind of an idea. You know, I would probably say that in terms of both conversation and also in prayer, I might say that I'm very feminine in those ways. You know, other people I know are very. I don't know. I'm not sure if there's really a good way of saying of telling, based on a person's biology, if a person's going to be good at prayer or not, or good at conversation or not. It is maybe as abstract ideas. It is true to realize some people relate to these things and some people don't. You know, and I think that is important to know and to understand and to you know. If you see someone struggling with prayer, you know, I teach prayer in schools. I've been teaching it for many years in camps and schools to kids. Unfortunately, I see a lot of people who don't connect to prayer. And it's something that I can't get frustrated about because it's a reality, you know. But, okay. Either as it may, moving on. Anyhow, so to finish this halacha, Amihu be'gemara didan, eino memayit ela hashmas kolo. In our Gemara, so now, he proved with Tosefta. Tosefta, remember, suggests as a possibility. Perhaps a person should say prayer as loud enough to hear with their own ears. Then they reject that. No, because you know Chanah's prayer could not be heard. So therefore, even by your own ears. That's where he's holding so far. So how quiet do you have to be during Shemona Esrei? So quiet that you can't even hear yourself. Umihu, but the Torah continues halfway through. Nonetheless, the Gemara didan eino mimayit ela hashmas kolo. In our Gemara, in the Babylonian Talmud, we learn that it only precludes making your voice heard to others, he implies. Which implies making your voice heard to other people. But to your own ears, you're allowed to say it loud enough for yourself to hear. And this is even explicit in Yerushalmi. So maybe the presentation of the question is different here. The phraseology is different. So maybe a person should raise his voice in prayer. Previously we learned in Tosefta, perhaps one may make prayer audible to one's own ears. Here, the question is, perhaps a person may raise his voice. It's not talking about making it audible to your own ears, meaning it accepts that already as acceptable. The question it has now is, perhaps you can raise your voice even louder. Kuvar perish b'chana, but it rejects that. V'kola lo yishamea, her voice could not be heard. So, in the Gemara, not in the Tosefta, but in the Gemara and the Yerushalmi, we paskin, it holds that you can make your voice loud enough for yourself to hear, but not loud enough for other people to hear. And he continues, v'hadas nosanes, it's even rational and logical, sheyoser tov lahashmiya la'oznav, it's better for yourself to hear, ki az yuchal lechavin yoser, because then you'll be able to have greater kavana. Perhaps because, another sense of yours is occupied in prayer. Not only speaking, thinking, but also hearing. So, the halacha, how should one behave? A person should say the Shemona Esrei loud enough for yourself to hear, but not loud enough for anyone standing next to you to hear. So that's actually a very delicate thing to do, because people standing next to you, even if you're whispering, whispers can be heard. And that's why shushing is so effective, or at least so annoying. You know, when a person makes this sound, that sound is a loud sound. Even over a crowd's din, that sound can be heard. It's amazing. No voice at all, but that sound alone can be heard by a large and rowdy crowd. So if a person whispering to themselves, that sound can be heard, you know, probably. So this takes a lot of focus, and probably that's the point, you know, to achieve the balance of being able to just barely discern your own breath coming out of your mouth, but to the point where it's like the lowest possible. It takes so much focus that perhaps that's the point. It's getting us to focus in so carefully on every word that comes out that that it really becomes a very big aid to us in tefillah. Now I think we're not going to get to the second page, so I'll have to bring it back for next week, which is probably the more important of the 2 pages anyhow. But thank God we had good questions. Yeah?
Comment. Rabbi Epstein and I in the morning are learning the laws of Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
And so while talking about prayer, said something that you are allowed to raise your voice in prayer on Rosh Hashanah.
Please.
And the reason the Mishnah Berurah gives is that because everybody has matzah. So it seems like one of the reasons that we don't want to raise our voice up loud enough for our neighbor to hear because they don't have a sitter and they need to concentrate on their own prayer.
Very interesting. More pragmatic. It's that if other people, right, if you had a sitter though, then it doesn't matter if someone else is davening out. You can follow along. I think that is a nice hope, but even with the sitter open before us, I think it's hard, it's easy to get distracted, you know. So
it's interesting.
Interesting. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do we learn anything from her Shirah?
We learn a lot. We learn a lot, and yeah, we're.
So there's.
There's
all these things are not just, or are they from the meeting with Ellie? Is there?
There's a great deal more about Chanah. We will see her a tremendous amount over the next couple months. Believe me. Yeah, this was just a start from the beginning.
Scratching the surface.
Right. So the problem is that even in the very beginning, there was a lot of material about that alone. So.
Are we going to see the commentary that said that she actually was like a thorn in the hand of God for the blessing and doing things to be taken to the priest and drink the bitter waters to get the blessing?
If you show it to me, then I'll definitely include it. I'll definitely include it. But remind me about it over the week, and then hopefully I'll look it up. Okay.
I read that too. I don't know if it's a medrash, but that she says she wants to go through the ritual of sota, and that way, if they find that she, was pure and innocent, she'll get the bracha and she'll conceive.
All right.
I'll
look into it.
It might be medrash. I read it also.
26, 31. That is 31.
Yeah. Okay. I'll look it up.
So, one other thing,
yeah.
You didn't really mention, and maybe you will, that we keep saying you shouldn't be drunk, you shouldn't be drunk when you pray. So kind of tie that in with Purim.
Oh yeah, this is a very interesting. One more important point, and just raise a very important point. There are a number of problems with drunkenness. This is actually an important source that obviously, first of all, in general, Mishnah Berurah discusses this. A person who gets drunk will detract from their ability to focus, certainly on prayer, but also doing other mitzvos as well. So it is actually not directly a violation of any prohibition, but because in a drunken state a person cannot fulfill mitzvos properly, cannot learn, cannot daven properly, so it ends up becoming usher to become drunk, because if you do that, then you'll end up violating a great number of mitzvos or wasting a great number of mitzvos. So on Purim, it becomes a big issue as well. There's a mitzvah on Purim that is the Besume Bepuria. A person has to do what's called Besume. A lot of people think this means to get drunk. So if it does mean that, and there are many poskim who think it does mean that, certainly it cannot be done right before davening mincha. It has to be done, first of all, not at nighttime. It's a mitzvah of the daytime. Second of all, it can't be done before mincha because mincha has to be said with kavanah. It can't be said drunk. However, many people believe that it does not because there's a great danger of not having kavanah during mincha, many people believe it does not mean to get drunk at all. In fact, there's a great linguist, Dr. Tawil, Chaim Tawil at Yeshiva University, who wrote a great lexicon on Old Semitic languages, and is actually a brilliant man. He contributed a lot to the salvation of Yemenite Jewry, and because he himself is Yemenite. And from here, he was kind of orchestrating some of their projects that have been brought to Israel. He says the word levasume, points out, is an Aramaic word, does not mean to get drunk. The word to get drunk means lehishtaker. That means to get drunk. So if the Gemara had meant for us to get drunk on Purim, it would have said chayav inish lehishtaker bepuria. A person has to get drunk. Levasume means to, what's bosem? Bosem, samim, is spices. Spices. Libesume means to become spiced. A little bit, maybe a little, what's it called? Like a little tipsy, a little bit like when Kiddush wine kind of hits your head after
DUI.
after a Friday of
Dominating
going around
under
and buying flowers and going shopping and picking up dry cleaning, and then you go home, you go shower and shave for mincha, and you run, you really haven't eaten anything all day long, and just come home from work, and they make Kiddush, and the wine kind of hits you, and you get that spiritual feeling, So that's probably all it means, to drink a little bit more wine than usual on Purim, for exactly that reason. It is absolutely forbidden to get drunk and then to daven and then to learn. The whole thing is wasted. So you're absolutely right. It's a big desecration of the Mishkan. If one were to go to Mishkan, you can't really go to shul drunk. It's an improper thing. You see a lot of yeshivas, people think it's such a mitzvah to get drunk, they get smashed at night on Purim, they throw up all over the medrash. It's a terrible chil Hashem, it's not kavod Torah, it's a disgusting thing to do.
And a lot of the rabbis encourage it.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
It's
they
ridiculous.
encourage it.
If a person holds to the post and we think a person has to get drunk on Purim, she should follow the Rambam. She should get a little bit drunk and then go immediately to sleep. The Rambam,
Well, there's an example of, it says right in the Bible that you can take your, redeem from the tithings, and you can redeem it for, sell whatever it is, and then take the money to go to Jerusalem, to the temple, and then you can buy strong drink. It's mentioned right there.
Yeah, I didn't say you can't drink anything. I said you can't get drunk. It's different.
You can buy it.
Words again, say the 2 words again, that's drunk and spiced.
Bisume is the
Bisume.
I'll before Purim I'll have a share. I'll tell you that. Okay, so any more questions before? Okay. All right, thank you very much. Hopefully all of our tefillah should be with great kavanah, and we should be also a project that we do together, not something that we're doing alone.
Hey.
Can I ask you 2 questions?